They said a janitor could never touch the blackboard at MIT, but when Ethan Cole, the boy with no future, solved the unsolvable, the entire institute fell silent. The halls of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at night are a cathedral of silence. Long corridors stretch under pale fluorescent lamps, echoing only the hum of the electricity and the faint clatter of a mop bucket. At this hour, the brilliant minds of the day have retreated to their dormitories or their labs, leaving behind the chalk-stained altars of mathematics. And there, among the shadows, moved a young man in a faded janitor's uniform. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 21 years old, with eyes that seemed too old for his face. His posture was quiet, almost invisible, as though he wished the very walls would forget he existed. He pushed the mop along the tiled floor of a lecture hall, humming softly to himself. Then he stopped. His gaze lifted toward the massive blackboard that stretched across the front wall. The board was still covered with chalk dust from the day's lecture. Across its dark surface sprawled lines of equations, fragments of a challenge that had been left unsolved. It was the work of Professor Richard Mallory, a stern man with a reputation for brilliance and severity. Mallory had posed the problem not to be solved, but to stand as a wall, a reminder to his graduate students of the limits of human reach. The problem was simple to write and impossible to answer. It belonged to the vast realm of algebraic geometry, the study of how shapes bend and twist when translated into equations. Mallory had written, "Describe the moduli space of curves of genus 3 under degeneration." For most, those words meant nothing. To mathematicians, they spoke of one of the deepest mysteries in geometry, how families of curves behave when they collapse, break, or stretch to infinity. No student had managed even the first step. But Ethan's eyes did not falter. He dropped the mop, walked closer, and lifted a piece of chalk left on the ledge. He traced the outline of the curves with his hand in the air, as if the invisible geometry hovered before him. The room was empty, yet his breath grew heavier, his pulse louder. He whispered to himself, explaining as if to an unseen companion. "When a curve degenerates," he murmured, "its parameters fall into lower dimensional strata. The trick is not to control the collapse, but to understand the language of the boundary. And the boundary is always speaking." He began to write. First, he drew a set of symbols that only a trained eye would recognize, a theta function, ancient and mysterious, a bridge between analysis and geometry. Next, he carved out conditions of stability, the Deligne-Mumford compactification. These were words and structures that graduate students spent years attempting to master. But Ethan, with chalk dust on his janitor's uniform, wrote them with the ease of a man recalling a melody from childhood. His mind was not recalling theorems. It was seeing shapes, light bending in space, infinite surfaces folding upon themselves like waves of the ocean. The room held its breath. Ethan paused. He looked again at the chalkboard, half covered with the remains of lectures and half with his fresh, clean strokes. The solution was not complete, not yet, but he had begun to draw a path through the wilderness, a path that no one else at MIT had dared to tread. He stepped back, his chest rising and falling. Then he set the chalk down gently, as though it were glass. He returned to his mop, to the anonymity of labor, erasing his own footsteps from the floor. For Ethan Cole was not supposed to be here. He was the son of no one. A boy raised in the shadows of an orphanage, shuffled through foster homes where books were his only companions. While other children played ball, he sat with donated mathematics texts, puzzling over symbols he could not yet pronounce. He had never known the warm hand of a father on his shoulder or the soothing voice of a mother at night. What he knew was silence, loneliness, and the secret fire of numbers. By the time he was 16, Ethan had devoured entire libraries, hiding in corners to copy equations by candlelight. But brilliance without guidance is a dangerous gift. He never finished high school. He drifted into Boston, working odd jobs, sleeping in rooms that smelled of mildew and regret. Eventually, he found employment as a janitor at MIT. To most, it was nothing. To Ethan, it was everything. He swept the floors of the very halls that carried the brightest minds in the world. Every equation he saw on a blackboard was a door, every symbol a whisper. He could not attend the classes, but he could clean the rooms. And while cleaning, he studied. Night after night, after the students had left, he lingered. He copied problems onto scraps of discarded paper. He memorized formulas written hastily during lectures. He pieced together a personal education, one fragment at a time. And now, tonight, he had touched the sacred wall. The silence of the hall seemed to deepen as he continued his shift. Somewhere far off, the clock struck midnight. Ethan pushed his mop, his shoulders heavy, his mind aflame. He knew the risk. If anyone discovered what he had done, there would be questions. A janitor had no right to mark a professor's board. But Ethan could not help himself. The board was a canvas, and the equations were the only language he knew how to speak. As he finished the room, he glanced once more at the chalkboard. The lines glowed faintly in the dim light, like constellations across a night sky. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. And then he was gone, swallowed once again by the silent hallway. What Ethan did not know was that his chalk marks would not go unnoticed. By morning, whispers would spread. A mystery solver had stepped into the ring, someone who saw through the impossible. Students would argue, professors would speculate, and Mallory himself would stand before the board in disbelief. But for now, Ethan Cole remained only what the world believed him to be, a nameless janitor, a boy with no future, moving like a ghost through the corridors of knowledge. Yet beneath the uniform, a hidden genius burned, a genius that would soon force the walls of MIT to listen to the voice of a forgotten soul. Boston nights are long and unkind for the poor. When the last trains groan into the tunnels and the professors of Cambridge retreat to their polished homes, the city grows cold. Ethan Cole did not walk toward warmth. He walked toward a narrow boarding room with walls stained by years of dampness. The room was no larger than a storage closet. A thin mattress sagged in the corner. The air carried the smell of boiled cabbage from the landlady's kitchen downstairs. On the desk lay no books, only a cracked lamp and a few worn pencils. Ethan could not afford the tools of a mathematician. He had no chalkboard, no reams of paper, no library filled with journals. But he did have one thing: a mirror. It hung above the sink, its silver backing chipped at the edges, the glass cloudy from age. Most men looked into a mirror and saw only their faces. Ethan looked and saw infinity. To him, the mirror was a canvas. He bought a cheap marker, the kind used for children's school projects, and began writing equations on the glass. By day, he mopped floors. By night, he stood before the mirror like a monk before a sacred text. He wrote until the surface was crowded with symbols, then wiped it clean with a damp rag and began again. The mirror became a battlefield, each night a new campaign against the impossible. The problem of Mallory's blackboard had followed him here. He could not forget it. While others might recall a melody, Ethan recalled equations. They circled in his mind even as he lay down to sleep, twisting and reforming, whispering like voices from another world. On the mirror, he drew the outlines of what few dared to attempt: the geometry of moduli spaces. To most students, the words themselves were daunting. To Ethan, they were living landscapes. "Think of it," he whispered to the empty room, marker pressed to the glass. A family of curves, each one like a violin string, each with its own pitch. When the string snaps, when the curve degenerates, what remains? The boundary speaks. The space of all shapes holds its breath. The glass filled with Greek letters, G for genus, T for parameters, F for mappings. He scribbled theta functions, modular forms, the skeleton of Deleene-Mumford compactification. When the surface grew too crowded to read, he paused, staring at the reflection of his weary face behind the equations. His own eyes looked back at him through a veil of mathematics. The boy and the genius, coexisting in silence. Then he wiped the mirror clean and began again. Night after night, this became his ritual. The marker squeaked against the glass, the rag smeared his hands with black ink, the lamplight flickered as though straining to keep up with his thoughts. Sometimes he would stop, lean against the sink, and close his eyes. He would see shapes bending in his mind, spheres collapsing into points, surfaces twisting into knots, spaces opening like flowers. Mathematics was not numbers for Ethan. It was vision. It was breath. It was survival. Yet, even in that sacred work, loneliness never left him. The mirror reflected not just equations, but the emptiness of his life. No photograph of family adorned the wall. No one knocked at his door to ask how his day had gone. The silence pressed against him like a heavy curtain, and in that silence, memories returned. He was 6 years old, standing in the rain outside the orphanage gates. His shoes were too big, his coat too small. He waited as other children were chosen by foster parents who smiled, who bent down to tie their laces, who lifted them into cars. No one came for Ethan. Night fell, and still he waited, until a worker carried him back inside. He had learned that day what it meant to be unwanted. Now, at 21, the memory burned as sharply as ever. Perhaps that was why he fought so fiercely with equations. They were the only thing that never abandoned him. The night stretched on. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. Inside, Ethan's breath fogged the mirror as he leaned closer, muttering to himself. If the boundary components are stable, then the degeneration is not chaos. It has order. The compactification holds. He drew an arrow, underlined it, then stepped back. For a moment, he allowed himself a rare flicker of satisfaction. The pieces were beginning to align. He could see a path where before there had been only wilderness. But joy was fleeting. The reality of his life returned as the lamplight sputtered. The rent was due. His shoes had holes. Tomorrow he would rise at dawn to mop the hallways again. His mirror might hold the secrets of geometry, but it could not buy bread. Still, he wrote until the ink marker bled dry. Then he sat on the edge of his mattress, staring at the ceiling. He felt the ache in his back, the hunger in his stomach, and the strange calm in his chest. The world might call him a janitor, but tonight, before the mirror, he had touched eternity. At last, he lay down. The equations glowed faintly in his mind like constellations across the night sky, and as sleep claimed him, the orphan boy dreamed not of toys or friends, but of infinite curves bending toward the edge of possibility. In the morning, the mirror would be clean again, ready for another battle. And so the hidden genius of Ethan Cole carried on. One man, one mirror, one relentless fire against the silence of the world. Morning was still far away when Ethan returned to the lecture hall. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet where even a dropped piece of chalk would echo like thunder. He set down his mop, stared at the massive blackboard, and felt again the pull of Professor Mallory's unsolved riddle. He erased the stray marks left from yesterday's class. The slate became a wide, gray canvas. Ethan picked up fresh chalk and began to write. Not hurried. Not boastful. Each line deliberate, as though he were building a bridge plank by plank. At the far left, he drew a simple diagram, a smooth curve folding until it snapped at a point. "Degeneration," he whispered. He explained to himself, as he always did, when a curve breaks, it does not vanish. It transforms. Its pieces must still belong to the great family of all curves. Step by step, he laid out the path. Stability conditions, the Deligne-Mumford compactification, the Torelli theorem that whispered, "The music determines the instrument." He moved carefully, like a craftsman shaping wood. The board filled with clean equations, arrows, and notes. To most, it was mystery. To Ethan, it was song. The Jacobian of each curve, the theta functions that recorded its rhythm, all became companions on his journey. Finally, in the far corner, he drew a small box, a mathematician's quiet way of saying, "Here it ends. The proof is whole." He set down the chalk. His hands were dusted white, his uniform streaked with powder. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking at the work. He felt no triumph. Only stillness, the kind that comes after a storm has finally broken. He cleaned the floor, aligned the chairs, and slipped out before dawn, leaving behind not just a lecture hall but a silent gift. By morning, students filed in with coffee cups and tired eyes. They stopped at the sight of the board. "This isn't Mallory's writing," one whispered. Another leaned closer, scanning the argument. Her voice trembled. This is right." Within minutes, the room buzzed. Word spread down corridors. The impossible problem. Someone solved it. When Professor Richard Mallory arrived, the crowd parted. He walked to the board, coat still buttoned, folder under his arm. He read line by line, testing each joint of the argument. At Torelli's theorem, he paused. At the theta seam, he nodded. Finally, he whispered to himself, "This is not a student's prank. This is real." He turned to the class. "Who wrote this?" No one spoke. Mallory's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with curiosity. Somewhere in the halls of MIT, a hidden voice had spoken with chalk. Someone who did not seek credit had crossed the boundary from impossible to possible. Meanwhile, in his narrow room across town, Ethan washed chalk dust from his hands. The mirror above the sink reflected only a tired young man in a janitor's uniform. Yet in the lecture hall of the most renowned institute in the world, his unseen answer had already begun to change the air. The city streets outside MIT carried the smell of wet concrete and fried food. Ethan Cole walked with his head down, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the February wind. The chalk still lingered on his fingers, though he had scrubbed them raw in his small sink. He thought of the blackboard, the box he had drawn at the end, and felt a quiet ache. Not pride, not relief, but something harder to name. Boston was waking. Students hurried with backpacks. Taxi horns called. The morning trains clattered underground. Ethan moved through it all like a shadow. No one saw him. No one ever did. Until he heard a voice. "Cole?" The sound froze him. He knew that voice, even after years. Rough, sneering, half amused. He turned. Across the street stood Marcus Doyle, taller now, heavier but unmistakable. Ethan remembered him not as a man but as a boy. The tormentor from the orphanage, the one who had shoved him into lockers, stolen his food, whispered to others that Ethan's parents had left him because he was worthless. Old wounds never heal fully. They wait, coiled. Marcus grinned. "Didn't expect to see you cleaning floors in Boston. Some genius you turned out to be." The words cut deeper than Ethan cared to admit. He tried to walk on, to bury the anger in silence. But Marcus stepped closer, blocking his path. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone. Look at you now, still nobody." Something inside Ethan snapped. Years of hunger, loneliness, rejection, all compressed into a single spark. His fist flew before his mind could stop it. Marcus staggered back, then lunged. The two crashed against a storefront, fists and curses filling the cold air. Passers-by shouted, someone pulled out a phone, and within minutes the blue lights arrived. The shriek of sirens cut through the fight. A policeman yanked Ethan back, pinning his arms. Another shoved Marcus aside, blood on his lip. "You're under arrest!" the officer barked, pressing cold steel against Ethan's wrists. The handcuffs clicked shut. Ethan struggled once, then stopped. His chest heaved. The fire of anger drained into exhaustion. The courtroom was smaller than he expected, wood-paneled, old, smelling faintly of dust and paper. Ethan stood at the defendant's table, wrists free now but the marks from the cuffs still raw. He wore the same janitor's uniform. He had no lawyer. He could not afford one. The judge, gray-haired and unsmiling, adjusted his glasses. "Ethan Cole, charged with assault and battery. Prior disturbances noted in your record." Marcus sat across the room with a smirk, a bandage on his cheek. He looked, Ethan thought, almost satisfied, as if proving once again that Ethan could never escape what the world had written for him. The prosecutor stood, polished and rehearsed. He painted Ethan as volatile, dangerous, a drifter with a history of anger. The words piled up like bricks building a prison wall. Then it was Ethan's turn. He cleared his throat. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "Your Honor, I have no counsel, so I will speak for myself." The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Proceed." Ethan breathed slowly. He remembered the nights spent in the library, reading not just mathematics, but whatever he could find. Law, philosophy, history. He remembered underlining passages about rights, about the weight of evidence. He spoke calmly, laying out the facts. Marcus had approached him, blocked his path, provoked him. He cited Massachusetts statute on self-defense, quoted Miranda v. Arizona to remind the court of due process. His words were not eloquent but precise, stripped to their bones. The room grew quieter as he spoke. Even the judge leaned forward, listening. When he finished, Ethan lowered his gaze. "I lost my temper. That is true. But I did not seek the fight. I did not choose violence. I chose to protect myself." For a moment, silence. Then the prosecutor rose again, voice sharp, listing Ethan's record. Fights in foster homes, disturbances at shelters, warnings from police. "This is not a single mistake, Your Honor. This is a pattern." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Enough." He looked at Ethan long and hard. "Your defense is unusually articulate, but the facts remain. You have a history of volatility that cannot be ignored." Ethan felt the verdict before the words came. His chest tightened. The weight of iron bars seemed already pressing on him. Outside the courtroom, Professor Richard Mallory waited. He had not meant to come. He had classes, papers, duties. Yet something in the handwriting on the blackboard, something in the modest box at the end, had stirred him. When he heard the name Ethan Cole from a custodian's schedule, curiosity had pulled him here. He watched as the young man was led out, shoulders hunched, eyes heavy with a pain older than his years. Mallory saw not a criminal, but a mind. The very mind that had drawn order out of chaos on his classroom board. He stepped forward. "Judge," he said quietly, "may I speak?" The judge frowned, surprised. "Identify yourself." "Richard Mallory, professor of mathematics at MIT." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Mallory cleared his throat. "This young man works at the Institute. I have reason to believe his abilities are extraordinary. He is not a danger. He is lost. With proper guidance, he could be an asset not just to the university, but to knowledge itself." The judge regarded him carefully. "You're saying he is a genius?" "I am saying," Mallory replied, voice firm, "that I have seen the work of a mind unlike any other in my career." The room held its breath. The gavel struck once. "The court will consider alternatives to incarceration. Mr. Cole, you are fortunate. A bargain will be arranged." Ethan lifted his eyes, confused, almost angry. He did not ask for rescue. He did not want pity. Yet some part of him, the part still raw from loneliness, felt the faint warmth of a door opening. And so the orphan janitor, who had written answers on the blackboard of MIT, now faced a new kind of sentence. Not prison bars, but the unexpected discipline of mentorship and the long, difficult path toward healing. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a church after service. People shuffled out in coats and scarves, voices hushed against the cold air. Ethan sat alone on a hard wooden bench in the corridor, wrists free but spirit heavy. His head leaned back against the wall, eyes staring at the ceiling as if it might collapse and spare him the burden of tomorrow. He had not expected a reprieve. Prison had felt inevitable, almost fitting. He was used to confinement, orphanage dormitories, foster homes, windowless shelters. Each had its own flavor of captivity. Steel bars would have been only the next variation. But now there was an opening, and he did not understand why. The footsteps of Professor Richard Mallory approached. The man walked with a cane of authority, though he carried no staff. His shoulders were broad, his jaw stern, his eyes sharp with decades of intellectual combat. He stopped in front of Ethan. "You are Ethan Cole," he said. It was not a question. Ethan's gaze remained on the floor. "Janitor, MIT, file number 227. Mallory's lips tightened. "Janitors do not solve algebraic geometry problems left to torment graduate students." The words struck like a stone across water. Ethan flinched, but recovered with a muttered reply. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mallory leaned closer. "You do. That board was your hand. The theta functions, the Jacobians, the careful order. That wasn't scribbling. That was clarity. I've seen it only a handful of times in my career." Ethan's fists clenched in his lap. He wanted to deny it, to vanish, but the professor's voice was too certain. Silence became his only refuge. Mallory sat beside him, surprising both of them. He folded his hands. "The judge will not jail you, yet. But conditions must be set. I intend to make one of those conditions mine." Ethan turned, suspicion burning in his eyes. "What do you want from me?" Mallory's reply was measured, each word deliberate. "I want you to study with me. You have a mind that does not come once in a generation. To waste it on mopping floors is a crime greater than any fistfight. You will learn, you will write, and you will face yourself in the process." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "Face myself? I've spent 21 years with nothing but myself. You don't know me." The professor's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. "I know brilliance when I see it. And I know pain when I see it too." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, as though the bench itself had grown sharper. Mallory continued. "This is not only about mathematics. The court requires that you work with a therapist. Not the kind you can mock or dismiss after reading their books overnight. Someone who will not leave when you show your teeth. Someone who will stay." Ethan's laugh faded. His tone turned bitter. "So that's the deal? No prison, but I have to sit in a room with some doctor asking me how I feel? Waste of time." "It is the only bargain," Mallory replied. "The choice is simple. You walk out of this courthouse into a classroom or into a cell." The words hung between them, cold and unmovable. Ethan rose abruptly, pacing the narrow corridor. His boots echoed off the marble. He rubbed his temples, muttering to himself. A classroom or a cell. Either way, it felt like confinement. But one carried chalkboards, the other carried iron. He stopped, turned back. And if I refuse? Mallory did not blink. Then you will rot, and the world will lose a mind it does not know it has. The cruelty of the truth silenced Ethan. For all his anger, he could not deny the hunger in his chest, the hunger for equations, for the fire of thought that made the world fall away. Could he bury that hunger behind bars? He knew the answer. At last he muttered, "Fine." Mallory nodded once, not triumphant but relieved. "Good. We begin tomorrow evening. My office, Building 2, Room 314. Bring nothing but your mind." Ethan smirked faintly. "That's all I ever had." Mallory rose, adjusted his coat, and extended a hand. Ethan looked at it for a long moment, then shook it with hesitation, as though afraid the touch would burn. That night, back in his small room, Ethan stared at his mirror. The surface was clean, but in his mind equations still floated like constellations. He traced one with his finger against the glass, then wiped it away. For the first time, he felt not entirely free. A bargain had been struck, chains of a different kind clasped around him, chains of responsibility, of mentorship, of healing he did not want but could not refuse. He lay down, listening to the distant hum of the city, and whispered into the dark, "A classroom or a cell, same thing." Yet deep inside, a spark stirred, a spark that wondered what might happen if he allowed himself, for once, to be taught. The agreement was signed, the ink hardly dry. Ethan Cole was no longer facing prison bars, but his freedom had been braided with 2 ropes: mathematics under Mallory's stern eye, and therapy under the watch of strangers. The first evening after work, Ethan sat in a waiting room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old magazines. The carpet was worn, the walls hung with watercolor prints of flowers meant to calm the anxious. Ethan crossed his arms and stared at the clock. Every tick was louder than the last. A woman entered, mid-40s, gentle smile, soft scarf around her neck. "Mr. Cole, I'm Dr. Howard." Ethan rose without a word. The office was neat. Bookshelves lined with titles on cognition, trauma, emotional regulation. She gestured toward a couch, but Ethan chose the hard chair instead. "So," Dr. Howard began kindly, "why don't you tell me what brings you here?" Ethan smirked. "Court order. Bargain. You know the drill." She nodded, unshaken. "Then maybe we can talk about what matters to you." For a moment he was silent. Then he leaned forward, eyes sharp. "What matters to me is that I've already read half the books on your shelf. Attachment theory, Piaget, Freud, Jung. I could summarize them faster than you could ask the questions. And I can tell you why most of it doesn't work. Shall I?" Her smile faltered just slightly. Ethan recited with precision the stages of grief, the Oedipal complex, the neurochemical theories of mood disorders. He spoke not like a patient, but like a lecturer, stripping each idea bare, then tossing it aside with a shrug. All these words, but none of them change the fact that kids still rot in orphanages and people still die alone. Dr. Howard tried to respond, but the session ended with her sighing, notebook closed. "Mr. Cole, you are clearly intelligent, but therapy requires willingness. Without it, there is nothing I can do." Ethan walked out with a hollow laugh. Another victory that felt like defeat. The second therapist lasted 1 week. He was younger, eager, carrying a notebook thick with exercises. "We'll try some cognitive behavioral techniques," he explained. Simple thought patterns, reframing negative beliefs. Ethan listened politely, then went home and read 3 textbooks on the subject overnight. At their next session, he returned the therapist's own words, sharper, cleaner, dismantled. "You say thought patterns can be rewritten," Ethan said. "But what about memory? What about the body storing trauma like scar tissue?" "You ignore biology to protect your tidy boxes." The therapist flushed. "We are making progress, but—" "No," Ethan interrupted. "You are repeating slogans." By the 3rd session, the young man excused himself, claiming scheduling conflicts. Ethan knew better. The 3rd therapist was older, stern, no nonsense. "I hear you have a habit of breaking your therapists," he said on the first day. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "I don't break anyone." "They walk away." "Maybe because you're afraid," the man said calmly. The words landed heavier than expected, but Ethan hit it with a smirk. "Afraid? I've lived through more than you could imagine." The therapist studied him quietly. "Then prove me wrong. Tell me about your childhood." Ethan's jaw tightened. He stared at the wall. Silence stretched long. The session ended with no words, only tension. By the 2nd week, the therapist admitted defeat. "You are intelligent, yes. But you are armored in cynicism. Until you choose to lower the shield, no one can reach you." Ethan stood, leaving with a muttered, "Then maybe no one should." Professor Mallory watched this pattern unfold with growing frustration. After each failed attempt, he confronted Ethan in his office, chalk dust swirling in the air. "Why must you treat therapy like another equation to solve?" Mallory demanded. "Because that's what it is," Ethan shot back. "Variables, patterns, predictable outcomes. You people think feelings are mysterious, but they're just chemical reactions with better marketing." Mallory slammed his fist on the desk. "Feelings are not equations. They are what make us human." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Humanity is overrated." The professor studied him, torn between admiration and despair. He saw the brilliance that had solved his problem on the board, but he also saw a young man chained to bitterness, unable to step beyond it. "Do you want to spend your life alone?" Mallory asked quietly. Ethan looked away. "I already do." Nights returned him to the mirror in his room. Equations sprawled across the glass like vines. He worked furiously, proving lemmas, chasing conjectures. But even as his mind danced, a hollow ache deepened. No theorem erased the memory of the orphanage gate. No compactification contained the loneliness. He wiped the mirror clean, leaving streaks. His reflection stared back, ghostly and tired. "Therapists," he muttered, "all useless." Yet somewhere deep, a quieter voice whispered, "Or maybe it is me who refuses to be seen." He silenced it with more equations. Mallory, though impatient, did not give up. He met with the court-appointed coordinator. "We need someone different," he said. "Not a textbook reader. Someone who understands grief, loss. Someone who will not leave." The coordinator hesitated. "There is one man, Samuel Reyes. He doesn't take many cases anymore. Lost his wife to cancer, works more with grief than with trauma, but he has patience." Mallory exhaled, almost in relief. "Send him. He may be the last chance." And so, after a trail of abandoned notebooks and empty sessions, a new name entered Ethan Cole's life. A name that would prove less a doctor than a mirror, less a therapist than a companion on the long road toward healing. Ethan did not know it yet. All he knew was that the next week another stranger would sit across from him, and he would prepare once again to tear their theories apart. But this stranger, Samuel Reyes, would not leave when the storm began. The winter afternoon was pale. the kind of gray light that makes the world appear fragile. Ethan Cole sat in another waiting room, legs crossed, fingers drumming against the chair. He was prepared. Another therapist, another hour wasted, another book's worth of words to dismantle. When the door opened, the man who entered was not what Ethan expected. No clipboard. No eager smile, no polished suit. Samuel Reyes wore a simple sweater, his hair silver at the temples, his hands steady though lined with age. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had stood too long at gravesides. "Mr. Cole," he said softly, "I'm Samuel. Come with me." They walked not into an office, but through a side door and out into the cold. Ethan frowned. "What is this? Don't you have a couch I'm supposed to lie on?" Reyes chuckled, a sound like gravel smoothed by water. "If you want a couch, buy one. I prefer the open air." They crossed a small park near the courthouse, snow patching the grass, trees bare against the sky. At the far end sat a weathered bench. Reyes brushed the snow from one side and gestured. Ethan sat reluctantly, shoulders hunched, hands jammed deep in his coat. For a while they were silent. Cars hummed in the distance. A dog barked. A child laughed. Ethan shifted, impatient. Finally, Reyes spoke. "I hear you read your therapist's books before meeting them." Ethan smirked. "Keeps things efficient." "And then you dismiss them." "Because they're frauds," Ethan said flatly. "Selling comfort, nothing more." Reyes nodded slowly as if agreeing. "Yes, comfort is easy to sell, harder to give." That answer disarmed Ethan. He glanced sideways. "So what's your trick? You going to ask me about my childhood? My feelings?" Reyes shook his head. "No. You'd only turn it into another exam. You'd win, I'd lose, and nothing would change." "Exactly." Instead, Reyes looked out across the park. His voice dropped, low and steady. "I buried my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. We had been married 32 years. She was the only person who could silence the noise in my head. And when she left, the world became unbearable." Ethan froze. No therapist had spoken so plainly to him before. Reyes continued. "I spent nights screaming into the floor, asking questions no book could answer. People told me theories of grief. They meant well. But theories didn't hold me at 3 in the morning when I could still smell her pillow." The words pressed into Ethan's chest. He opened his mouth to mock, to say something sharp, but nothing came. Reyes turned now, his gaze direct but gentle. "You think you are smarter than the rest because you can memorize their words. But you are still a child, Ethan. You have not lived. You have not loved. You have not lost. You know everything in books, but nothing in life." The sentence cut deeper than any insult Marcus Doyle had ever thrown at him. Ethan's breath caught. He stared at the ground, blinking hard. Reyes did not push. He simply sat, letting silence do its work. Minutes passed. A breeze moved through the bare branches above them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice quieter than he intended. "You don't know what you're talking about." Reyes shrugged. "Perhaps. But tell me. When was the last time you let someone stay long enough to hurt you?" Ethan clenched his jaw. Memories surged. The orphanage gate, the children taken by families, himself left behind. The laughter in the dormitory when Marcus stole his shoes. The endless nights alone. "Nobody stays," Ethan muttered. "They always leave." Reyes nodded again, without surprise. "So you leave first. That is your armor. Brilliant, sharp, impenetrable. But armor also keeps out the sunlight. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to run, to escape the bench, the old man, the unbearable weight of truth pressing on him. Instead, he stayed. Something in Reyes's presence pinned him there. The older man leaned back, eyes closed briefly as if savoring the winter air. I cannot teach you equations, Ethan. That is Mallory's task. What I can teach you is how to sit with pain without letting it consume you. I cannot promise joy. Only honesty. Ethan swallowed hard. For once he had no argument ready. He felt small, like a boy again, standing in the rain outside the orphanage. Reyes opened his eyes. You are not broken, Ethan. You are afraid. And fear can be named, faced, lived through. That is the only way forward. The park grew quiet again. Ethan stared at his boots, snow melting around the soles. He whispered almost to himself, What if I can't? Reyes looked at him with a kind of fatherly sorrow. Then you will keep writing proofs on mirrors until the day your hands stop working. And no one will ever know the boy behind the genius. Is that the life you want? Ethan had no answer. His throat burned, but no words came. For the first time, he did not laugh, did not argue, did not dismantle. He simply sat, silent, wounded, but unable to walk away. And in that silence, something small and unseen shifted within him. The faintest crack in armor worn for 21 years. Spring arrived late in Boston. The Charles River thawed slowly, ice breaking into drifting shards, while magnolia buds pushed against the cold as if defying despair. Ethan Cole still walked like a shadow through the halls of MIT, but there was a new rhythm to his steps. Therapy with Samuel Reyes had not yet softened his armor, but it had cracked it. One afternoon, while cleaning the biology building, Ethan paused by an open classroom door. Inside, a young woman stood alone at a microscope, auburn hair pulled into a loose knot, her white coat dusted with chalk from the neighboring lecture hall. She looked up when she sensed him, her expression open, curious, without judgment. Hi, she said simply. You're the janitor, right? Could you give me a hand with the light switch? It keeps buzzing. Ethan hesitated, then stepped inside, fiddling with the switch until the hum quieted. She smiled. Thanks. I'm Clara Jensen, second-year med student. He nodded, muttered, Ethan. She tilted her head, studying him. You know, you looked at my microscope before fixing the light. Most people just flick the switch. Caught, he shrugged. Habit? I like patterns. Clara's eyes brightened. Then maybe you can help me. I'm trying to model DNA folding in certain cancer cells. The equations don't cooperate with my biology brain. Something stirred in Ethan. He stepped closer, glanced at her notes. Numbers, ratios, the beginnings of a probability matrix. He picked up her pencil and began to sketch. The double helix represented not only as a structure, but as a set of harmonic oscillations, each fold a wave function that could be described mathematically. Clara watched in awe. You just made it sing. Ethan smirked, but softly. It already sings. You just weren't listening. Their eyes met. For the first time in years, Ethan did not look away. Days became weeks. They met often. Sometimes in the library, sometimes in the park near campus. Clara spoke of medicine, of how she wanted to return to her hometown in California and work in a free clinic. Ethan listened, saying little, but her voice warmed him like sunlight through winter glass. One evening she asked, Do you ever think of leaving Boston? He stiffened. Why? Because you don't belong here in shadows. You belong where your mind can breathe. Her words unsettled him. He changed the subject, pointing out a star rising over the skyline. But the question lingered. The turning point came one rainy night. Clara invited him to her dormitory kitchen. They sat with mugs of tea, listening to the rain. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't care if you mop floors or solve theorems. I care about you." The words pierced deeper than she knew. Ethan's chest tightened. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "You don't know me," he snapped. "You think you do, but you don't. You'd leave if you knew." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Then tell me. Show me the truth." The storm inside him broke. He stood, pacing, fists clenched. "The truth? I grew up in an orphanage. Nobody wanted me. Foster homes threw me out. Every person I ever cared about left. That's who I am. The boy left standing at the gate while everyone else goes home. Don't you see? I can't lose again. I won't." His voice cracked on the last word. Clara rose slowly, her own tears falling. "Ethan, love isn't about leaving. It's about staying. Even when it hurts. I want to stay." But Ethan's armor snapped shut. He shook his head, eyes hard. "No. Better I push you away now than watch you walk away later." She reached for him, but he stepped back, turning toward the door. "Don't follow me," he whispered, and was gone into the rain. That night, Ethan returned to his mirror. Equations smeared across the glass, chaotic, unfinished. He pressed his forehead to the cold surface, whispering, "You fool. You coward." But no theorem, no proof could silence the echo of Clara's words. "I want to stay." He erased the glass with trembling hands until only his reflection remained. A young man who had touched infinity, but could not bear the weight of a single human heart. Clara, alone in her room, wept quietly. She had seen the brilliance in his mind, but also the wound in his soul. And though he had shut her out, she whispered into the silence, "I'll wait, Ethan. I'll wait." The days after Clara's tears were heavy with silence. Ethan wandered through MIT's halls like a ghost. He cleaned classrooms, solved equations on scraps of paper, and returned each night to his mirror. But nothing soothed him. Her voice haunted him. "I want to stay." And his own reply, sharp and cruel, "Don't follow me." He avoided her, avoided Mallory's eyes, avoided even himself. Yet he could not avoid the weekly meeting with Samuel Reyes. That evening, the sky was overcast, the city dim. Ethan entered Reyes's office expecting the usual quiet questions. Instead, he found only 2 chairs set close together, no desk between them. The older man gestured. "Sit." Ethan sat stiffly, arms crossed. Reyes studied him. "You've been running." Ethan laughed bitterly. "I run every day. Not with your feet, with your heart." The words landed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stared at the floor. Reyes leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Ethan's voice cracked. "Nothing." "Ethan." The name was firm, almost fatherly. Silence stretched until Ethan's breath shook. Finally, he whispered, "She said she loved me. And I pushed her away." Reyes did not look surprised. "Because you believe everyone leaves." "They do!" Ethan burst out, his voice raw. "At the orphanage, I waited at the gate every Sunday. Kids left with families, with smiles, with hands holding theirs. Nobody came for me. Not once. Do you know what that feels like? To watch cars drive away and know you're not chosen? To stand there until the sun goes down and still be standing when night falls? His words broke into sobs he tried to swallow. His hands covered his face. For years he had hidden this wound behind equations and anger. Now it spilled out, uncontrollable. Reyes moved gently, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. The contact was steady, unwavering. It was not your fault, Ethan. Do you hear me? It was never your fault. Ethan shook his head violently. Yes, it was. If I had been better, smarter, quieter, something, maybe they would have wanted me. Reyes's voice grew firm. No. Children do not earn love. They receive it. You were left not because you lacked worth, but because the world failed you. The words pierced through years of armor. Ethan's sobs grew deeper, his chest heaving as if decades of pain were finally clawing their way out. Reyes pulled him closer, holding him like a father holds a grieving son. Again and again he whispered, "It was not your fault. Not your fault." For the first time in his life, Ethan let himself believe it might be true. The storm of weeping lasted long, until exhaustion softened it into silence. Ethan sat with eyes swollen, breath ragged. Reyes handed him a handkerchief. "You've carried this weight for too long," Reyes said. "It kept you alive, but now it's killing you. You must set it down." Ethan wiped his face, his voice small. "I don't know how. Start here, with me, and maybe one day with her." Ethan closed his eyes, Clara's face rising in memory, the warmth of her hand, the tears on her cheeks. He whispered, "I don't deserve her." Reyes shook his head. "Love is not about deserving. It is about choosing. She chose you. The question is, will you choose her?" The silence was thick. Ethan's mind raced, but for once his heart whispered louder. He looked up at Reyes, voice trembling. "I'm afraid." Reyes nodded gently. "Good. Fear means you care. The bravest act is not solving equations. It is letting someone see you." Later that night, Ethan returned to his mirror. But he did not reach for the marker. The glass was clean, reflecting only his tired face. He stared long, then whispered to his reflection, "It wasn't my fault." The words felt strange, fragile, but alive. He said them again, louder this time. "It wasn't my fault." And as the echo filled the small room, for the first time in 21 years, Ethan Cole felt the weight begin to lift. Meanwhile, Samuel Reyes sat alone in his modest home. On the mantel stood a photograph of his wife, her smile gentle, eyes alive. He touched the frame and whispered, "I kept my promise. I stayed." He believed she would have wanted him to guide lost souls like Ethan, to hold them until their storms broke. And in that quiet house, he felt less alone. The spring sun returned to Boston, soft and golden, carrying the promise of renewal. On campus, students hurried toward exams, shoulders bent under the weight of books and dreams. Ethan Cole moved quietly among them, pushing his cart, polishing desks, sweeping chalk dust from boards that once had been his sanctuary. Yet something in him had changed. The storm had broken. Thanks to Samuel Reyes, the words, "It wasn't my fault," had taken root inside him, small and tender, but alive. For the first time, he could breathe without the choking taste of shame. Professor Mallory summoned him one afternoon. The office smelled of old paper and fresh chalk, sunlight angling across the desk. Mallory leaned on his cane of authority, not a real cane, but the stern weight of a man accustomed to control. "Ethan," he began, "I've spoken with colleagues at Princeton, at Berkeley. They would take you as a fellow immediately. Your work could be formalized, published. You could have a career, recognition, a salary, a name in the annals of mathematics. Ethan listened, silent. Once these words would have lit fire in his chest. Now they felt strangely hollow. Mallory pressed on. Do not waste this gift. Do not vanish into shadows again. The world needs what you carry. Ethan met his eyes. Maybe. But that's not the life I want. The professor frowned. Then, what do you want? Ethan paused, searching for the truth. He thought of Clara's tears, of Reyes's steady hand, of the orphanage gate where he once stood alone. Slowly he answered, I want to stay. With someone. Not just with numbers. Mallory's expression softened, though his pride was wounded. He leaned back, exhaling. Then go. But remember, knowledge is not only for you. Pass it on someday. Ethan nodded, gratitude shining quietly in his eyes. His 22nd birthday arrived without fanfare. A few fellow janitors gathered, clapping him on the back. They wheeled out an old car they had repaired in secret, dented, paint peeling, but sturdy. Happy birthday, Cole, one said. Now you can go somewhere. Ethan touched the wheel, overwhelmed. He had never been given a gift of such weight. Not money, not prestige, but freedom. That night, he packed his few belongings into a bag. 2 books, a spare shirt, and the memory of chalk still etched in his hands. He left his cart in the hallway, keys on the hook, and stepped into the spring night. The road stretched westward, long and uncertain. He drove through towns of brick and farmland, through plains where the sky seemed endless, through mountains where snow lingered stubbornly. The old car rattled, coughed, but carried him faithfully. Each mile was a release, each sunrise a promise. At times, doubt whispered, what if she has moved on? What if you arrive too late? But another voice, gentler, answered, love is not about deserving. It is about choosing. He chose to go. Meanwhile, in California, Clara Jensen sat at her desk, textbooks open, lamp glowing. She tried to focus on her studies, but her thoughts drifted eastward, toward a boy who had built proofs on mirrors and walls around his heart. She whispered to herself, I'll wait. A knock startled her. She opened the dormitory door. There he stood, dust on his jacket, eyes weary, chest heaving from the long journey. Ethan Cole, no longer just the janitor, no longer just the orphan. He had come against every fear, every wound, every reason to hide. For a moment, they said nothing. Then Ethan, breathless, whispered, I had to see about a girl. Clara's tears fell, but this time they were mixed with laughter. She stepped forward, and he let himself be held. For once, he did not run. Back in Boston, Samuel Reyes sat at his modest desk. On the wood lay a folded letter. He opened it slowly, eyes moving across the simple handwriting. Samuel, thank you for staying, for telling me the truth, for being the father no one else was. I had to go see about a girl, Ethan. Reyes closed his eyes, the ache of grief and the balm of pride mingling. He touched the photo of his wife on the mantel and whispered, We did it, love. One more soul pulled from the fire. And so the hidden genius of Ethan Cole stepped into the light. Not as a name carved into journals, not as a professor crowned with honors, but as a man who had faced his wounds and chosen love. The unsolvable problem was never just on Mallory's blackboard. It was inside Ethan himself, the theorem of loneliness, the equation of abandonment. He solved it not with chalk, but with tears, with courage, with the decision to open his heart. In the end, genius was not about conquering mathematics. It was about daring to be human. And so, friends, the story of Ethan Cole comes to rest, not in the quiet halls of MIT, nor in the pages of a journal, but in the warmth of two hearts choosing to stay. If you have listened all the way here, I thank you. Truly. Stories only live when they are shared, and your time is the greatest gift. If you felt even a spark of warmth in this tale, if it reminded you of someone you once loved, or perhaps of yourself, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe so that each new story may find you like an old friend at your door. Until next time, may your days be steady, your nights gentle, and may you always find the courage to love and to forgive.